Welcome to our June 2023 iteration of our virtual Third Thursday event. Our topic for today is wildfire mitigation strategies, and we have three very exciting presentations for you all. But first, an NDPTC announcement. We're super excited to announce that our Management 486 Planning for Coastal Hazards course, which some of you have already taken with us, is now officially FEMA certified and ready for direct delivery whenever you guys are ready. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. First up, we have David Marasco. He's a PhD student with the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And he's going to be talking about the Rapid Integrated Damage Assessment impact on the 2021 Marshall Fire in Boulder, Colorado. Next, we'll have Elizabeth Pickett, one of the co-directors of the Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization, to talk about some of the initiatives that they've been working on in wildfire mitigation in Hawaii and how those efforts have led to increased community resilience. And last, but definitely not least, we have Michael Buckwald, the co-founder of Torch Sensors, to provide insights on the Torch sensor technology, which is an innovative sensor technology in wildfire detection and warning, and how that technology can help those living or working in wildfire-prone areas. Without further ado, David, are you ready with your presentation?
I am. I will share my screen and we'll get started.
Oh, while David is getting ready, if you could either put your questions in the chat or hold your questions till the end of the presentations, that would be great. Thank you.
Let me get this to slideshow mode and we will get started. Can everybody hear me and see my presentation? Affirmative?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So back in 2022, at the NDPTC, I teamed with Dr. Carl Kim, Dr. Lily Bowie, Eric Yamashita, Mike Force, and Lisa Webster to do an assessment of the damage wrought by the 2021 Marshall Fire in Boulder County, Colorado. We're calling this Rapid Integrated Damage Assessment because these are things that can be repeated for future events, and we think these paint a very useful picture of hazard incidences in the United States. So in the event description, it was December 30th of 2021, the wildfires broke out in Boulder County around 11 a.m. They were reported shortly after that. Over 30,000 people had to leave the area because of the danger the fire posed. It ultimately destroyed over 6,000 acres. And it burned 6,000 acres and destroyed over 1,000 structures, most of which were residential homes. And it was brought under control on January 4th of the following month. And these are pictures, obviously, of commercial buildings that were destroyed. So the fire was obviously pretty significant in magnitude. This is the initial map. The fire damage information came through. I got this information from my colleagues, Eric Yamashita and Junath Dimre. And these buildings, the destroyed buildings are in red. The damaged buildings are in green. And as you can see, most of the buildings that were affected by the fire were ultimately destroyed. I can zoom in a little bit on this map, but as you can see, there's an outlier in the far northwest quadrant. And I will explain why the fire probably made it to that location, in addition to all of the other places it ended up. Incidentally, it's not shown on this particular map, but I will demonstrate this shortly. The fire started at the western extreme of the map and then progressed from west to east. The research design that we determined for this project was that of a mixed methods approach, a combination of imagery, geospatial analysis, and interview. We used interviews to help inform our image collection areas. And then Mike Force actually collected that imagery for us with his team. And he conducted follow-up interviews with some of the people who agreed to participate in this project. We also used that CDC's Social Vulnerability Index to assess the risk levels of the population segments affected by the fire. And then we use other data generated by Joe Scott and his colleagues to assess conditional fire risk and fire exposure of the buildings that were affected. First, this carried out by my colleague Lisa Webster. She initially found that the overall social vulnerability based on the CDC's index was low in the area that was affected by the fire, which is outlined in the middle of the map by the black curves. However, in looking at specific elements, she first found, and it's shown in the top map, that buildings in the northeastern part of the fire area had increased vulnerability due to household composition and disabilities. This means that by virtue of the people that tended to live in those structures and also the disabilities they had elevated risk. It was at a moderate level, according to that element of the SVI. And then in the southern southwestern area, there were vulnerabilities related to minority status and language ability. These would, for instance, if someone does not have the requisite language skills to communicate with emergency responders, and they might find themselves at a disadvantage when they're trying to evacuate. That's a very unfortunate reality that we have to confront in certain situations. Incidentally, not shown on here, also in the southwestern area, there was also vulnerability related to transportation mode and also demographic, or I guess you would say demographic group affiliation. So there were not so many buildings affected in this area in the Southwest, but that shows a social difference between the two quadrants that are identified here. The second thing that was done was the collection of imagery by Mike Morse and his team, and this is an actual display of what we derived from that in one place. On the right side, you see an image of something from an overview of a neighborhood as it existed before the fire. And of course, the different red markers indicate different stops on the route to collect imagery. And then the red cone is the actual field of view that is shown in the left two images. Those are the same place before, after the fire and before the fire, after on top and before on bottom. The before data was taken from Google Street View. And this allows us to evaluate the visual impact of the devastation of the fire. And I can say at first blush, if I had been shown each of these pictures independently, I wouldn't have immediately recognized them as the same place. So it really shows how much devastation was wrought by this event. And after this, after the images were collected, Mike Force conducted interviews, which were very illuminating. A lack of proper insurance information regarding some of the structures, and also misperceptions about the potential severity of fires. One person that was interviewed said that prior to living in this area, he didn't think a grass fire could be as intense as a forest fire, but this event convinced him otherwise, as his property was destroyed. And then the part that I was mainly involved in, the risk and exposure, we piggybacked on data collected by Joe Scott and his team. And what's important about this is that this data actually existed before the event in Boulder County. So there was some knowledge of the potential hazard that these buildings faced well before this event happened. These two particular metrics were the ones that probably displayed the best risk, it displayed risk the best in our opinion. First of all, on the left, we have conditional fire risk. And this is based on the idea, if a structure exists in any given place, what risk does a fire occurring there pose to that structure? In other words, it's agnostic about the probability of a fire, but if a fire does occur, what's the likelihood it will be damaged catastrophically? And in this, it doesn't show these buildings being areas of highest condition based on 100. Most of the buildings that were just that range from 30 to 60 in terms of condition. So fires occurring in these areas already suggested I might have dropped. Did I drop for a second?
David, your audio just went a little wonky. If your internet's a little shaky, You
Yeah,
could
it is a little shaky.
turn off
I
your,
apologize.
yeah, you could turn off your camera for a bit while you present.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, actually, can you still see the presentation?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, excellent. So, okay, for what I was talking about was the conditional fire risk on the left side. What's the likelihood of a certain magnitude of damage if a fire occurs in that spot? And then on the right side, we have exposure. Exposure actually is very illuminating because it shows that a lot of these buildings and the subsequent fire path were in areas where there were high levels of burnable fuel, meaning that this fire could perpetuate easily if it were to start. You can see that I marked the fire origin area and its path on the map. And it obviously trundled across the landscape to the northeast and then a little bit to the south, but it stopped there. And what actually happened was the fire came down and damage in the south were to the north as well. But what we can see based on this is that a lot of the buildings that were initially burned were in areas that had a lot of fire fuel. And then the communities that were subsequently burned in the denser areas with the buildings were immediately adjacent to this, so that once the fire, it was too late to control the fire to protect these communities where there was already a lot of fuel to stoke the fire across the land. So what is notable about this is that this information all existed before the fires broke out. So were the planning agencies and the emergency agencies in Boulder aware of this beforehand? The takeaways from this project: social vulnerability should be investigated in multiple dimensions. It's not just the overall SVI that we need to look at. We need to look, because these being adequate insurance buildings. Buildings are underinsured, it's going to make reconstruction much more difficult. There are opportunities to incorporate existing metrics concerning risk and exposure into community planning. We know this by looking at the data that was generated by Joe Scott and his colleagues. And this revealed that this was already a very highly flammable area that could have maybe done with some mitigation beforehand. And finally, in higher risk areas, there should be incentives for builders to adopt practices that further contribute to hazard mitigation. We're not saying that these don't already exist, but there should be a conscientious effort to make sure that there are plenty of incentives so that builders are collaborating with public officials on making sure risk is minimized. And that's all I have for today. Here are my image sources, citations, and the link to our report, which was posted on the Natural Hazard Center in Colorado. If you have any questions, please to me directly. And without further ado, I will move on to the next speaker. Thank you much for your time.
Thanks so much, David. If we could see if Elizabeth was ready with her presentation, that would be great.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen real quick and then we'll get started. My name is Elizabeth Pickett, and I am one of two executive directors for a nonprofit called Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. And we are a pretty small nonprofit with a really big scope of services and geography. We have been working since the year 2000, and we started off on the west side of Hawaii Island, and over the years grew to be island-wide and then statewide. And now we have projects even going into the Western Pacific. We run a wildfire network among our Western Pacific Island partners, and we have work in Palau and Guam, and it's a growing part of our geography. But our vision is for the people and places of Hawaii and the Pacific to be wildfire ready and wildfire resilient. And so this, it's a natural next presentation after our last speaker, because there's that big question about, there's risk and what can you do about it? And so that's kind of the realm in which our organization works. So over the years, we've become a hub for prevention, education, mitigation projects, wildfire planning, and we're getting more and more into the post-fire recovery sphere. And we had started off small in a small area with just a few communities, and multiple types of partners with different expertise and interests as the founding board. And we found over time that managing or reducing risk and working for the protection of communities and natural resources concurrently, and to do that in a multi-partner, cross-boundary sort of way, and always being collaborative and thinking about being as proactive as possible is really a winning combination for effectiveness. And so we have carried that through even as our scope has expanded. That said, we're a nonprofit. We have a conventional board of directors and staff. Our staff is now increased to about 9, so we need to update the picture. But we're also guided by technical advisors throughout the state and region. And so we have folks on our technical advisory board, from our fire chiefs to our our University of Hawaii cooperative extension specialists in botany and forestry and rangeland management. And we have watershed partnership coordinators. We just have lots of different types of expertise that weighs in on how our organization can be useful and how to blend the different elements needed to really optimize fire protection and risk reduction. So I started this off at the Zoom out to just talk about the trends and patterns of wildfire occurrence in Hawaii. And when we think about what a place looks like and its risk and what is going on in its fire regime, and if there's fire or not, or if it's a lot or a little, it really has to do with what's happening at the intersection of what is going on with people, with population, with human behavior, what is going on with climate, and what's happening with vegetation and fuels. And so, at least for our region, for Hawaii and many areas in the Western Pacific, we have increasing episodes of drought, even when our rainfall numbers look to be the same on average over the year, or if it's even increasing. The way our precipitation is coming down, the pattern that it's coming down is influencing wildfire risk, in that we get these huge pulse rain events, lots of growth, and then a drying out period in between. And so we get lots of vegetation and then it dries out, and that increases our fire risk. We also have an expanding grassland savanna ecosystem, which is not native. So as our native and watershed forest burn, the edge burns with each fire, travels across the grass, goes into the forest. What comes back is not native. Our native ecology is not adapted to fire, and it's slow growing, and the soil is damaged, the seed bank is damaged, but our invasive fire-prone grasses have no problem moving into those new areas. So at this point, over a quarter of our state is covered in these non-native fire-prone invasive grasses. And we also have increases in human-caused ignitions. I think a lot of people don't realize that Hawaii is as fire-prone as it is. And we have 75% of our fires are accidental, and 99% of them are caused by humans. We have 1% lava and lightning combined. So this is not a natural fire ecosystem. In many cases, it's really human-driven fires and invasive species driven. So when we're thinking about, what is contributing to our wildfire risk, we try to figure out where we have some say, where we can influence or, mitigate. And we've landed on really focusing on managing vegetation and working in the human world and environment, the social environment, to really work together coherently, consistently across the state toward wildfire preparedness and protection. So of those accidental ignitions, the contributing causes, or the main causes, are campfires, equipment, and that's everything from welders and grinders to arcing, sparking power lines, vehicles, and fireworks. So we find this number to be very hopeful, because if so many of our fires are accidental, we feel really strongly that if we can shift culture to understanding that Hawaii is fire prone, and that there are things we can all do to not start fires, that's a really good direction that we can head. And additionally, with all the fuel that we have, over 1 million acres of highly combustible fuel that dries out very quickly, it's fine and flashy, fire travels really quickly across once it's ignited, we can actually do a lot to manage vegetation. So we focus a lot on those factors. And when we initially went statewide in 2012, we went through a huge effort to gather all the fire records from our state, county, and federal firefighting agencies and put them all in one place and look at the trends and patterns. And we're in the middle of updating it to 2022. But those first 10 years that we looked at revealed a lot. We discovered that the same percentage of our land across the state of Hawaii burns as some of the most fire-prone Western United States or continental states. And that was eye-opening because by nature, we're insular. All the records weren't all compiled in one place. And when we realized, our acre numbers are smaller, but the portion of our state that burns on average every year is really high. And those impacts are broad, they're long-lasting. And so to some people, they're sort of invisible because it has to do with forest and soil and post-fire erosion that can happen days to years after the fire has taken place. And so we've really been trying to bring that awareness out. So what you see here are just the point data from ignition locations. But over time, we're getting better and better at getting the perimeter data so you can really see the burned areas. But these are just ignitions. We also learned that fires are happening on all sides of every island, particularly where people can go. So you notice if you took the roads off the map, you'd probably still see the roads because that's where a lot of the ignitions are occurring. Anywhere people can drive or access or hike, that tends to be where the fires are starting. And that's important. It's important to note that windward and leeward sides are burning because in Hawaii, in the windward areas where it's wetter, sometimes saturated, there's not as high of a awareness or of an alert that wildfire could happen in those areas. But as we're seeing things dry out in these drought episodes, we are seeing the wet sides burn. And those are places that have tons of vegetation and they're already having ignitions. And so the fires might be getting bigger more of the time on the dry sides, but really under the right conditions, anywhere can burn. So this has been a really important talking point in terms of raising awareness and getting mitigation activities to increase. So we know, looking back over the records, you can see this goes back to 1904. The top graph is looking at fire occurrence. And you can see that we have started about 1960 having more fires and they are much bigger than they used to be. And a lot of that matches up very well with the decline in active agriculture. So as we've converted forested landscapes to agriculture, and then as that agriculture is no longer active and those lands have gone fallow, it's the perfect situation for invasive grasses to move in. And then once they burn into the forest, and then there's more grassland, et cetera. So there is a feedback loop where our grasslands are expanding, and it all really started with changes in land use. And then matching up with humans accidentally starting fires. So when we're thinking about doing mitigation, building resilience, we realize that there's a lot of pieces going on that contribute to what we see related to wildfire. A lot of people jump straight to suppression and they think the fire department or firefighting is going to be the main piece we need to talk about. But for our organization, we work on a lot of the other parts. So we think about it in this kind of equation where we have ignitions, mostly human caused, in places where there are unmanaged, dry, easily combustible fuel. We have this recipe for wildfires, and that impacts our natural resources. It threatens lives, safety, communities, neighborhoods, municipal infrastructure, even municipal budgets. There's a lot of impacts. And then we also have lives and safety of our firefighters on the line and their resources and their budgets. And so we want to be thinking about all of these pieces as we move forward in mitigation, because it's really a package and we need to take action in each of these areas. So where we focus the work is on reducing the causes of wildfire. So that includes a lot of prevention education in terms of reducing ignitions. We also are working really hard to do as much cross-boundary fuels management as possible, particularly where the risk is high or the wildland-urban interface really poses a huge threat because we have communities that are adjacent to these huge tracts of wildland environments that are unmanaged. And then we also are working to protect our natural resources from fire spreading in and causing more damage and preparing our communities. Hawaii is not built. Many of our subdivisions were not built with wildfire in mind. So we have, limited access, one ingress egress, which really inhibits evacuation. We have not a lot of buffers around residential areas. They're backed right into wildland environments. There's a lot of infrastructural pieces, and there's a lot of awareness that needs to happen for communities as well in terms of protecting their home, their yards, creating a family evacuation plan. So there's a lot of pieces on the community front that need to be shored up. And then, of course, we want to optimize our firefighting and make sure they have all the equipment and training, access, water, all the things that they need to do their optimal job. So with that said, we've been carrying forward lots of initiatives in a lot of different areas. And one of the key things we've done is to start off with really good fire planning and hazard assessments. So we do all these plans collaboratively. We have community wildfire protection plans that cover most of the state. And there are a lot of different formats for those types of plans, but we really think of it as a process. So we gather all kinds of stakeholders and players and agency members together. We identify our shared priorities. We develop an action plan. And really that's how we move forward, is that we've all looked at the problem together. We've identified priority actions for each geography together. And then we figure out together who can do what and how to make it happen. And so this has been really effective. We also do other kinds of fire management plans and fire protection plans for land units and other kinds of land areas and communities. But the community wildfire protection plans are a really key piece of what we do. So this is our most updated map of where in the state is covered with community wildfire protection plans. And we have gone through this process. We identified our highest priority, most fire-prone areas, and then we've been chipping away at getting plans in place for each of these high priority areas. And so we're wrapping up 2 of those right now for Hamakua and East Honolulu. But now we've gotten through this and they're all due for an update. And so we have funding to update the Hawaii Island and the Kauai CWPPs, that's the acronym. And then we are about to pursue funding to update the rest. But these are really key plans. I think plan is a misnomer because that sounds like we know what we're going to do, but rather it's a collection of our priorities, of who can do what. We look at the hazards together. It's a foundational resource for future action, and we refer to it over time. It also opens up funding opportunities for several federal grants that we can go for education, mitigation, or planning money. So these are really important pieces, both socially and for funding, to move forward on. And so this is a big piece of what we do and we get in place first, because then all the rest that I'm going to show you comes after the fact and builds on the priorities that we learned about as we gathered everyone together to figure out what needs to happen next. So to also inform that, we have a project that we are a part of with the University of Hawaii. And together we implement the Pacific Fire Exchange program, which generates the best available science that we can for the region. And we have lots of information available. If you're interested, you can go to pacificfireexchange.org. But we really gear this information towards practitioners and land managers to be able to optimize the work that they're doing related to fire. And it's also where we report out the gathering of all the fire data and the trends and patterns for Hawaii and for the Pacific. So you can check that out if you're interested. But we use all of this work. We use the social side of things and the best available science to come together to identify where to do things like fuels management, where to work in the prevention realm, where to do our community work. So a big part of what we do is raise funds and then implement fuels reduction projects in key areas. Oftentimes, as much as we can, crossing boundaries, working with communities and natural resource managers and our firefighters to identify how best to set up these fuels management areas. We also do them to protect our sensitive natural resources that we just don't want to burn. We also develop outreach and education materials, everything from curriculum to children's materials, keiki materials, for use at conventional events. And also we run a statewide wildfire preparedness campaign every dry season, and that's going on right now. If you happen to see the Wildfire and Drought Lookout messaging come through, please forward and share and help us amplify it. It's pretty unfunded, but all 35 partners and fire agencies come together to push that messaging and have consistent talking points and reminders to the public. So we have that going on. We also run for the state in partnership with Division of Forestry and Wildlife, the Firewise USA program, the Hawaii chapter. And we have lots of great action going on by resident leaders and communities and neighborhoods who've decided to take their own wildfire risk reduction seriously and in their own hands, and to carry out projects. And they've really become ambassadors for fire preparedness and protection. We have a community of communities. So all the Firewise communities gather quarterly and sometimes more for trainings, to share lessons learned, and lots of good stuff to keep them inspired and motivated and supported. And we often try to raise funds so that they can have some money to work with to get their priority projects done. And just for a quick glance at what's going on, across the state of Hawaii, you can see where the Firewise communities are currently located. We have 3 more on their way this year. We just found out there's more interest from some other communities on other islands as well. And I think this program is happily growing and becoming a very effective means of neighbors getting to know each other, building resilience in their own community, reducing risk, and really that action and that connectivity and those relationships that they're building in the Firewise program transcend fire. And we keep hearing stories about how it applies to so much else, hazard related and other. So people are really getting to know each other. There's an opportunity. It's a really good feeling program. And we try to run it in a really, fun and inspiring way. We appreciate and love all the people we get to work with. And we try to carry that culture forward so that this is really an inspirational program that can support people to do their risk reduction that ultimately makes them safer and more resilient over time. As part of that program, last year, we were able to get funding and bring in somebody to train a bunch of our Firewise resident leaders, as well as our fire department personnel from 3 of our 4 county fire departments, to get trained in home assessments. And so now we offer free home assessments to anybody who asks for one. And it's a wildfire risk home assessment to look at ways that residents can shore up their home structure or their yard to make them more safe from wildfire. And this program is growing, and people are really making use of the opportunity to get a home assessment or a consultation. And then finally, we're available to provide technical assistance. We have a lot of science and data and maps. We have lots of fire plans. We have lots of training materials, a lot of education we provide to lots of different kinds of stakeholders. We have programs for teachers, curriculum, all the way to fire journaling and, non-traditional school materials and lesson plans. And then we have more technical stuff for fire and fuels, fire management, fuels, fire behavior, mitigation best practices for people who work in the field, like conservation folks, best practices for farm plans and things like that. So we really have thought hard about all of the types of people who contribute to what's going on the ground when it comes to wildfire risk. And also we've tried to think through how we can best support them toward fire mitigation. And so we try to make materials available, training opportunities, workshops, whatever we can to sort of fill in the gaps. And at this point, we have this huge sort of arsenal of information and education. And we've really started focusing more now on actually the relationships and the facilitation, the coordination, the collaboration, to use those materials for real life action. So we have lots of working groups going on. We have collaboration groups that are regional, that are specific to certain projects, that are specific to fuels management. We also, we have student groups, we have our Firewise communities, and this is really where it's at now. We also have one I mentioned earlier for the entire Western Pacific, so that our Pacific Island partners can be working together and sharing their lessons learned and receiving training at the same time together also. And so in the beginning, we were just like, we need to understand this fire issue. And then now we need to make materials. And we're at this point now where we are maintaining and continuing to grow those program areas. But a huge part of what we're doing is just supporting people now in their efforts to work together proactively, to take action in a systematic way with as much support as possible. And I think this is where the resilience comes in, because as more and more people get active, become informed, they become ambassadors, they share with other people. And it's the patchwork is sort of starting to fill in where it's all starting to become connected, which is hugely different than the situation we inherited 20 years ago, when we didn't really have the talking points that Hawaii was so fire prone, and we didn't have the resources and materials available, and we didn't have the fire plans or any of that stuff. So we've come a long way, but there's still tons of work to do, because I still hear people surprised that Hawaii has any fire. So I think, it's at this point, it runs the full gamut of people who really get it and are really active to people who are just learning and finding that out for the first time. And one thing we like to celebrate is that now for the last year and a half, all of our fire agencies have been gathering, not to just talk about suppression, but instead, we've been meeting monthly or at least every 2 months to get together and have consistent messaging, to share lessons, or et cetera, among our fire agencies. So it started off with just our counties getting together to make sure everything is consistent and to learn from each other and get to know each other for prevention. And now it's expanded, and we have our state and federal folks coming as well. And so this is kind of like resilience and collaboration on a different level, because now, we're also making sure that all the parts have collaboration, and our counties work together amazingly anyway, but this is a space and time where we can gather and just talk mitigation, which is an exciting place to be. So with that said, we just really like to share with everyone and promote the idea that there's a role for everyone to play, from planning and budgets to being a resident and having family, or being a teacher. It doesn't matter. Like we often hear, doesn't the fire department do that? And our answer is like, no, they can't do everything. We all have to do our part. We can't start fires. We have to make sure other people are being safe whenever they're using anything that sparks. We need to be careful where we drive. We need to plan with our family. We need to be doing our work around our homes and yards. We need to be advocating for our fire suppression agencies to have enough funding and have what they need. We need to be advocating for our natural resource managers and our large landowners to have what they need to mitigate risk and to mitigate fuels. So really, there's no one we don't need. And so there just really is greater protection for our people and our places when everyone is participating collaboratively and proactively. So all of you you're like I'm singing to the choir, because everyone coming to these meetings I know is already a part of the solution. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And also thank you for being a willing audience for our presentation. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at directors@hawaiiwildfire.org. Our website is hawaiiwildfire.org. And also, if you want that, the best available science kind of information, that's pacificfireexchange.org. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and I'm not sure how we're doing questions, but I'm available for questions by whatever means makes sense.
So as a reminder, folks, if you could put your questions in the chat, if you want to keep a record of them, or if you just want to jot them down, we'll take questions at the end. Michael, did you want to queue up your presentation?
Yes.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Buckwald. I'm co-founder and CEO at Torch Sensors, which is an ultra early warning company. We focus on bringing ultra early distributed warning to fires wherever they're happening. So essentially, we have realized that even though in some ways technology has attempted to solve the problem of identifying fires, that different approaches are just too late. So whether sensors are being built on top of a toolkit like a large camera on a hill, or if they're human fire spotters in the forest, all of those are simply too late at detecting a fire when it really matters most. And because of that, fires outside at least have increased year over year without fail for the past 30 or 40, maybe even 100 years. And on the other hand, if you look at how we have dealt with fires in indoor environments and urban environments, if you look at the success of the smoke detector and think for a second, okay, from the time in sort of 1965 when the smoke detector was introduced, going forward, you see this astronomical decrease in death and destruction in urban environments from fires starting indoors. And you have to think about why that's true. And the reason why that's true is because we have radically early detection indoors, not just radically early, but localized. So if a smoke detector is going off in my apartment, I know about the fire early enough that I can go pick up a fire extinguisher, I can get a pot of water, I can even sometimes just by turning off the stove, make it disappear. But of course, that isn't true at all with outdoor fires. So whereas for, I guess, most of human history, again, prior to that sort of 1965 creation of the smoke detector, the way we identified fires was through a very, I guess, centralized approach where we had also human fire spotters in cities who might sit on like a church tower and look out and say, okay, I see smoke, let's send the fire department. And while that was better than nothing, of course, it wasn't good enough, which is why for most of human history, before we just developed distributed sensing for cities and indoor fires, we watched our cities and towns and buildings burn to the ground. And of course, that doesn't have to be the case. And that has stopped for the past, I guess, 70 years or 80 years since we've deployed indoor smoke detectors. And I guess that's really led us to think about, okay, how do we bring early detection to the outdoor environment so that we can detect fire also locally with enough detail that we can tell a user or customer where the fire is and tell them where it is when it's small enough that they can actually do something about it. So I guess a way to prevent these statistics, which I'm not going to spend too much time talking about because everyone here obviously knows the statistics in terms of how terrible wildfires are and probably knows them better than I do. But yeah, but I guess our thesis as to why this is true is because there is a lack of radically early detection. So we're trying to create the first IoT sensor that detects fire. Again, radically early. It can be as small as 2 by 2 feet and across a large enough area. About 10 acres is the area that we've targeted because that is a large enough area that we can affordably deploy the sensors, but also enough area that a user can quickly move to where the fire is and put it out themselves. And the sensors use LoRa, so they can communicate from sensor to sensor without any, so there's no power necessary because it's solar powered, and there only is one point of internet required, which can be inside a house or a building. And again, early detection really is everything for this problem because fire is exponential, and with something exponential like fire, really the key is identifying it early and alerting the user about the location in a way that lets the user immediately extinguish the fire. And I guess this is hopefully a comparison of, I guess, torches detection time, which can be 1 to 10 minutes versus other approaches like gas sensors or cameras. And again, cameras here are, I guess, these distributed camera approaches, which again are useful and can detect a fire still earlier than just kind of hoping humans call 911 or alert someone, but often far too late, unfortunately, to prevent the problem. And in our case, we alert the user about a fire, and there is a mobile app, which mostly would, I guess, be used on the consumer side. But there's also a web app where users in, say, an industrial like network operations center can see the alert, and they also get enough information to see. I guess we send, I guess, not just is it a fire or not a fire, but all the information that we're capturing from the sensors, which is abundant because there's 6 or 7 sensors in each device, and So we send a fire risk score for the overall sensor, but also, and the location of the sensor, but we also give values for each of the, I guess, 6 sensors, in terms of the thermal cameras, in terms of the spectral cameras, in terms of the gas sensors. Again, very focused on enabling detection early enough that something can be done about it. And here is, I guess, an image of what a sensor would see in the environment. So again, detecting fire early when it would be very, very difficult for someone to see it visually at a distance. And each sensor has I guess, 3 120-degree cameras. So essentially each sensor is seeing 360 degrees of the environment at all times. Because we really want, I guess, the placement and the monitoring to be easy and seamless. Great. So again, ultra early detection. Here's the sensor. So trying to bring, I guess, ultra early detection where we can see a fire as small as 2 feet and across an area as big as 10 acres if there is line of sight, and transmit using without any internet connectivity to I guess a cloud-based notification, either in a network operations center with a web application or a mobile phone. I guess bringing early notification to the outdoors finally. Thank you guys, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Thanks so much, Michael. Those were all great presentations. I do see one question from Jeff in the chat. Smoke alarms are very good at detecting and notifying, but the key element is what we do with that information, and it's not necessarily leaving the building. Given that and the challenges we see with Shake Alert, how do you expect people will process and respond to a message advising a 90% chance of a fire?
Yeah, so I guess we're hoping that the user, I guess one thing that separate, so we're less focused on alerting users about large fires that already exist, and more focused on alerting a user to a fire that's happening on their own property or on a property they own, because we can support multiple sensors. So you could have, say, 10 different properties, but essentially, because there's already, I guess, a lot of different platforms and government alerts and stuff, even though we're incorporating those into our application, our primary focus in the area, I think, has been underserved, is giving users notification about, is there a fire happening on their own property, so that they can go do something about it, whether that's calling 911 before the fire escalates or putting it out themselves if the fire is still small enough, they can put it up themselves. But that's a good question.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
It did. I guess I'm just not.
Okay.
Good. Sounds like it's maybe not quite ready for prime time. I mean, how people are going to respond and testing that is such an essential component to any kind of emergency notification system. And from what you said, you're hoping that they'll do something. It seems like you would want to precede that with a fair bit of, hey, here's what this can do, and here's how it works, and we've tried it and tested it. I mean, again, I think Shake Alert is a pretty good analog, and that's Shake Alert is just for life safety. Here, you're giving them kind of a life safety warning, but as much as, hey, maybe there's something on your property that you want to take care of, call 911 or deal with it yourself. That's really different from the way, say, a smoke alarm works, and what we expect you to do for that, which is mostly get out of the house.
Well, so I think that the smoke detector analogy is relatively apt, in the sense that we're often with the smoke detector, yes, half the time it is, I guess, leave the house, but I guess also half the time it is, okay, go look and see, is there a fire? If there is a fire, is it small enough, etc. And also even, I guess, call the fire department. because at least in my building, one smoke detector going off won't actually trigger the general alarm for the whole building. That only gets triggered if the smoke detector in the hallway is going off. So I think the analogies, I think they are closer together, but on the other hand, I would agree with you absolutely that we have to really test it, of course, and see if users behave as they do with the smoke detector today or not, of course.
Well, plus side is if it's not a fire that gives an alarm, they can't go around all the little installations and yank the batteries out. So you got that going for you.
That's true.
I saw Carl come off mute. Do you have a question?
Well, great presentations. And I really like them because they're really quite different and I'm hoping that there's some kind of convergence across these. I'm particularly interested in the technologies. And so, Michael, if you could talk a little bit more about the sensors, and it seems like they're in a fixed location. Would it work in a mobile application? I mean, could you put it on a drone, for example, or would that even make sense? Or we have a particular interest in transportation vehicles. And I think, as Elizabeth pointed out, oftentimes the ignition is, because of transportation vehicles or other types of technologies. And so I'm wondering if that makes sense to, have more mobile applications so that instead of being in one fixed location, you could use this technology, across a larger area.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. In terms of the actual sensors, there's no reason that they wouldn't work while moving around. We're not assuming for our algorithms or the sensors themselves that the device is stationary. I think the reason that we focus mostly on a stationary approach is just because of, I guess it's easier for the purposes of early detection and also, I guess, knowing who to notify, etc. But I think, I could imagine maybe mobile use cases where, for example, if it was like a large landowner, like a government, like a federal park, or even maybe a very large commercial landowner, like a commercial timber operator who has enough acres that essentially a drone could be deployed. It could have the sensors on top, and then we could still know which network operations center to channel it into, and also we could still be a little focused in terms of where are we flying the drone. Because I think one of the things we're trying to avoid is the reliance on luck that centralized approaches have, in terms of, is the fire happening where the fire spotters are, or is the, I guess, tower or where the cameras that are mounted on a hill, have we gotten lucky and those happen to be placed proximate or in the right location where we can identify it? I guess trying to take those phenomena out, but I think there are good use cases with mobile also, just with those caveats.
So have you been working on strategies for deployment? And you presented about the technology itself, but is there a way to relate this to the underlying risk levels, both, going back to David's presentation, where a lot was known about both the fuel, the potential, but also the assets that we're trying to protect. Have you developed processes for ensuring that a certain area is covered? I mean, basically doing the work of where you would be positioning the fire spotters, but I mean, beyond the technology itself, is there, are there some processes that are available as to where you would deploy these sensors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Also, of course, we would like them to be placed in the areas that are at the highest risk of fire. But of course, what those areas are, and also, I guess that's a simplification because, of course, it's not just, I guess, the areas where there's the highest risk of fire, but it's probably some kind of fusion of what are the areas at highest risk of fire that also have infrastructure that's important, or could be evacuation routes, etc. Or I guess could be near sources of fuel that could easily cause like it to spread faster. We absolutely should think about all of those things. We haven't. I think we for better or worse have mostly up until now been focusing on letting the customer make those decisions, and I guess providing them the units. However, certainly if there are partners who can help with that process, or help us understand, I guess, the different factors, because there are so many. Yeah, that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and that's and then I mean, part of what I think we're looking at are some critical infrastructure that needs to be protected, and then creating either buffer zones around, those areas, so that so that there could be actions taken to protect, for example, wooden bridges or other things like that. So but very, very interesting.
I see Matt has a question. This is going to be our last question. If you do have any questions that we didn't get to, please email us and we'll try and get back with the speakers and get an answer to your question. But Matt, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Matt Lai. I'm a member of the Firewise community here on Oahu, and this technology could be very helpful because the riskiest places are the home wildland interface. And so, for instance, in our community, and I know in many other communities here in Hawaii, they have an area that they really want to monitor for fire. So something like one of these sensors, which is available, I think, for $299, could be spread out along the fire break that we are trying to clear, and it would spot a problem before anybody would see it. So it's like a smoke alarm, but for the fire break, or for the periphery of the community that says there's a fire coming toward us. So I could very much see how something like this, without the need for a lot of technology, could be very useful for Firewise communities. Just a comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that comment is absolutely right, and that's certainly I guess our mission is to, I guess, enable whether it's landowners or fire brigades to identify fire early enough that they can do something about it. So yes, and I absolutely view, I guess, the wildland urban interface as the I guess area that could most benefit from it, regardless of, I guess, who the potential customer is. So thank you for the comment, Val. I absolutely agree.
So thank you all for your comments, questions, and great presentations. We have rolled past the top of the hour. So sorry. Carl, did you have anything you wanted to add before we close up?
Sure. I just wanted to thank our really excellent speakers. I hope we can continue to work together and think about ways in which we can partner. The National Disaster Preparedness Training Center is considering developing some wildfire related training courses as well too. And so maybe there's a lot of great material that you've presented today. And hopefully, as many of you may know, we're a national center, but we do have a big focus on the Pacific Islands, and also many of the communities that are impacted by climate change and wildfires and other sorts of hazards and threats. And so, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I want to thank the awesome team for pulling this session together. And I do hope that we meet up in person sooner rather than later.